can see right now, without LeBron, Lakers are struggling.
Let me tell you about a team I hate, all right? I know the Dallas Cowboy fan is here, so I had to make sure he knew how much I hate this team.
I'm ready.
I've often said that the people who run baseball, they try very hard to ruin it.
I'm from Brooklyn. I don't have a problem saying it to his face.
Oh, I'm from Brooklyn.
Hey, guys, any...
This is a presentation of Northeast Streaming Sports.
What's up, everybody? It's another episode of Coast to Coast. I am your host, Pags. I got Stat Guy Dustin with me. Bo is in Hawaii. We hope, at least that, as far as we know. We don't know if he made it out or not, whether the storms subsided enough for him to be able to go ahead and get out of town, or if he's still in Seattle, just waiting to get to Hawaii. Jay is on assignment. We're not sure what he's assigned to, but he's definitely doing. Dustin, how are you, brother?
I must have not did too bad yesterday. He had me back on, so I guess that's a good thing.
Hey, listen, when you know your stuff, you know your stuff. And especially, hey, listen, if we're going to have Loudmouth Jay come on here and talk it over everybody, you're actually easier to deal with in some cases. So, anyways, we're going to start talking a little bit. We always talk about football because football does rule the world here in the U.S. And we're always talking about Seattle. We're always talking about Dallas. But you are a Vikings fan. And I know a number of the Viking world order up there. You know what I mean? You're in Wisconsin, which is probably a little funny because let's say you're probably more of a suburb of Chicago than you are of Green Bay.
Nope, I am 15 minutes south from Green Bay.
Oh, 15 minutes. Oh, see, this is why I get bad information from Jay all the time. He said that you were like south of Milwaukee. So
no, 15 minutes south of Green Bay.
Gotcha. So how is it that you are not a Packers fan?
Well, one of my cousins grew up in West Virginia because his father was stationed out there when he was in the military. And he ended up playing high school basically at the rival high school that Randy Moss went to high school at Rand, West Virginia. My cousin was never like a great defensive player, but he was good enough where he was getting kind of looks at D2, D3, and some smaller D1 colleges. And then he had to play against Randy Moss at a game in high school. And basically he's told me to this day that's the reason why he quit playing football, is when he started seeing guys like Randy Moss in high school. And then you just look at them and like, yeah, I have no shot at the next level if this is the people that I'm going to have to go against. So he pretty much just quit. So I basically said whoever drafted Randy Moss was going to be the team that I would follow, and he ends up going to Minnesota.
So there you go. So you become a Minnesota fan. You forego your lineage, I got to imagine, because everybody else in your family is probably a Packers fan. They feel like they own the team because I know what that's all about, like out up there. They're like, oh, yeah, we're going to definitely do all that fun stuff. But so being a Vikings fan, living in Wisconsin, I guess has got to be a little bit challenging. You're always, these are division rivals here, so you're playing them twice a year, and I got to imagine that you are, persona non grata in a lot of parties when the Vikings come to town. How is it being in Packer country and a Viking fan?
It's difficult at times. I mean, obviously, they're always going to hold over my head that Minnesota's 0-4 in Super Bowls and the Packers have the 5 Super Bowl wins. But then at the same time, my rebuttal to that is you had Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers for 30 years as your quarterback and only had 2 Super Bowls to show for it. So you can't really sit here and tell me that my franchise hasn't done anything when you've had 2 of arguably the top 6 quarterbacks of all time and have 2 rings to show for it. Does that just kind of goes to show you that once the Packers make the playoffs, which I wish Minnesota could make the playoffs as much as Green Bay did, but at the same time, I'd rather miss the playoffs and have constant heartbreak that the Packers have given the Packer fans the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years when they get to an NFC championship game. But one thing about the Packer fans is, yes, they have like the personified we own the team, which is literally just a piece of paper, and it's the dumbest thing in the world anyways. But for all the people that want to sit here and say that Packer fans are the most dedicated and kind of the most loyal fans in the football world, they are also some of the rudest fans in terms of if you go to one of their games as a visiting fan, they are annoying and they are very rude. And like, yes, I've taken my son to the Chiefs game when the Chiefs were in Green Bay for a preseason game. I try to get to as many Viking games as I can, but it's just such an unpleasant experience because the Packer fans are so very rude to anybody that's not a Packer fan there, and they just try to act like you know nothing about football when you're there.
And I concur with that. I did not have a good experience up at Lambeau Field. I was not a fan of that. First off, I want to sit in a seat. I don't want to sit on a metal bench. Secondly,
a metal bench is like an inch above the concrete too.
Yeah, and then like they are like the fans. I had one fan who like had some type of like noodle or something, was like banging me in the head. I'm like, listen, don't touch me. There's a lot of things that you guys could do. You could talk all the crap you want to. Don't touch me. Because when you start to touch me, I can start to touch back. And I know when I touch back, things are not going to be as fun. So, and ultimately, and we were winning that game because Rodgers was hurt. Their backup quarterback wound up getting hurt. Their third string quarterback goes in there. And he actually played a pretty good game, but we won the game. And it was in November. And it was like the warmest day in Wisconsin history in November that day. Ultimately, it was like 65 degrees there. And while we were at the stadium, I didn't really enjoy myself. It wasn't as fun as I would have liked it to be. And like I said, I was painted up at the time. I didn't have the shoulder pads on at that point, but I was kind of like a Philly sports guy at that time. The Philly sports guy name wasn't really there yet.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I mean, some of them were nice, but most of them were really kind of rude. And I'm like, it's just like, you think you own the team. You don't own squat. You know what you own? This crap that I'm about to take in the toilet. That's what you own. You know what I mean? So I kind of giving them that type of business because they were being rude. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, listen, if you want to try to be personal about it, I can be personal, but you're not going to like what I got to say.
Right.
So, and ultimately I got through it unscathed. And then the other thing is that it was a long time since I had been up there, but the ladies up there are like, they like smell fresh meat. When you are from out of town and you're not from there, anything that they could do to get out of Green Bay, they're trying.
Yep.
So it was very interesting to go to the bar after the game, because I felt like I was like George Clooney or something like that. Like I was that popular.
Yeah.
So, but that's kind of interesting. You know what I mean? Like I said, not all of Green Bay fans are like that. So I'm not trying to, put them all into the same box. It's just not like the same Philadelphia. Not every fan is a douche. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a couple that really ruin it for everybody. And like I said, I probably sat near this one person who thought that they were going to try to be cool, and I showed them how cool they weren't.
And like, I don't mind if, like, yes, we can banter and kind of talk shit to each other because that's like obviously what you're going to do when you're opposing fans. You're going to talk shit to each other. Like when your team does well, you're going to rub it in their face. And if their team's doing well, they're going to rub it in your face. But there is a fine line that you don't want to cross. And a lot of Packer fans cross that line, especially when the team is doing good. When the team is doing good, they act like their shit doesn't stink. They act like they're the best thing to happen since sliced bread. But then all of a sudden, when you have this year, like when Green Bay was struggling earlier in the year, I was at the Viking game in Green Bay this year when Minnesota won that game, the game that Cousins got hurt. And the Packer fans, like, if you cheer for your team, get so super annoyed because their team is sucking so bad. It's just like, how is that any different? You basically do the same thing that I just did when your team is doing well, but because your team is sucking, you think it's the worst thing in the world that we're cheering for them.
Right. So it's like, hey, listen, we all don't like the same team. It's okay. But, ultimately, I don't see a lot of Packers fans traveling.
No.
Oh. Look at
What's
this.
Up, gentlemen?
What's up, Bo?
I did finally make it.
How big of a yeah.
I ended up finally making it here at about 1:30 this morning.
Wow, God bless.
So,
what's it, like 3:30 in the morning now?
No, it's 7 here. So this is it's 2 hours earlier than the West Coast.
Oh, okay. I thought it would be more than that.
5 hour difference from you.
Did I drop out there?
No, you're good.
Yeah. It's a 5 hour difference from the East Coast. Yeah.
Got you. Oh, so then you should be able to get on every morning.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can
Yes.
hear you.
We can hear you. You do bounce out a little bit, but that's because the satellite, it doesn't hit really well.
Well, apparently the Wi-Fi doesn't work very good.
Understood. Well, it's good to see that you made it out there. Eventually, it was a 10-hour delay. You said. All right, I guess we lost him there.
see if I can get a little better signal here.
Gotcha. Well, we know how everything is a little tougher in Hawaii.
I bet there's even light switch here somewhere.
There we go. We're getting a whole tour of the room.
Okay, I'm trying to get some better signal for you.
The light, if you hit the switch, they'll turn on.
It doesn't look like I'm going to really be able to talk to you guys. Sorry, man. But I was going to ask you, what was the worst fan base you had to endure as the Philly guy? I'm going to jump off. I'll listen to it on YouTube. My signal isn't good enough to actually stream.
Understood. Well, we appreciate you checking in and letting us know. You and your wife enjoy your time down there in Hawaii. And I will answer what's the worst fan base that I've dealt with. I that's actually a really good question for me as the Philly sports guy, because I've dealt with a lot of them. So, all right, perfect. We're gonna get him out of here. Thanks for checking in there, Bo. I appreciate it. The worst fan base I've dealt with as the Philly sports guy, the Giants are always a little tough.
Yeah.
They are a pain in the ass to deal with. Also, the Saints. Now, not because that they are, they threaten violence a little bit.
Yeah.
But they're not really violent people. You know what I mean? So, but the one thing that there was about that is that, the last time I was there, they are very sensitive to hurricanes.
Mm-hmm.
So with everything that happened to them, and we had gone there right after Jersey had their hurricane. It was like the stronger than the storm era. So we got there, and we got asked a lot of questions about that, how everybody was doing, what was really the stuff. But they are a very passionate fan base and are very, very, no problem, Bo. We appreciate you stopping in anyways. Once you get a good restaurant with some good Wi-Fi, then you can have breakfast and check back in again at some point. But so I remember I'm there for the playoff game, and I had 3 or 4 guys try to square up with me, and it's like, come on, dude, what are we doing? We're gonna play football here in the street? Is that what we're doing? You know what I mean? It's but it's that's kind of the mentality that they take, that they are very similar to the in-your-face Philly, thought process, which I'm fine with too. I don't have any problem with that. But when I'm by myself, it causes a little bit of a different dynamic. You just got to be a little bit more careful. You know what I mean? It's just because I can't take on 4 or 5 guys. Just not happening. So, so you got to be careful with your words and such like that. When somebody wants to try to square up because you're wearing shoulder pads, you're just like, yeah, buddy, funny. And then, just keep on going. But ultimately, I see that they are pretty tough to deal with. The people say Raiders fans are tough. I never made it to Oakland, so I can't say for any bit of certainty about them. When I was in Pittsburgh fans are rough when their team is doing well.
Yes.
They are similar to Packers fans when their team's losing, they are quiet as church mice, you know what I mean? Yeah. They don't say a word. But when their team is winning, they can't be loud enough. So that's kind of they kind of fall into that category. Everybody thinks Dallas fans that aren't from Dallas are loud, but Dallas fans from Dallas are actually great people.
Yeah.
So they can get, obviously They have a rivalry with the Eagles, so they are passionate against the Eagles now. It never used to be that way, but it is now. They are a lot more uh, passionate's the best word to use there. They're just a lot more passionate now against the Eagles than they used to be. They still look at the Steelers as a main rival, and the Redskins or Washington as the
They're
main
the
rival.
Redskins. Who cares?
Yeah, exactly. But so that is, and then, but ultimately, 49ers fans, they are crybabies. They are they think they're all tough. Most of the time, they fight themselves. Like they fight against their own fan base. It's just ridiculous. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
and again, I'm not going to pigeonholing them into one group,
Yeah.
but they do probably have one of the largest Latino base,
Yep.
and when you compare the way they cheer to the way soccer fans cheer, it's very similar.
Okay.
So I can understand it. Like I can appreciate it. However, I'm not into the violence. I ain't into the fight. You don't have to fight me. This is not my mom on the field. I'm not defending their honor like that. The fact that you feel like you need to is a problem.
Right.
But I think what occurs is that there is some communication differences when you speak, most times a different language, or Spanish may be your main language, and now you include some alcohol, and now you don't know what to say right because you don't know all the words to speak, and then it becomes a fight. Escalates very, very quickly because the lack of communication between the banter.
Yeah.
So, and I feel like that part is common at 49ers games, because I feel like every 49ers game that happened this year, there was a fight. And I feel like it can't always be because somebody's bantering badly. Like I said, I feel like that there's more involved. I feel like it's communication difference, or it's a alcohol related incident. So, but that's probably the ones that I have. Minnesota, however, has a disdain for Philadelphia. Now, you could say, all right, well, they were treated so badly when they came to Philadelphia for the NFC Championship game that they probably shouldn't have even been in the first place, but they had that lucky catch, and scored the touchdown it with no time left on the clock, thanks to the guy not paying attention to what he was tackling, and ultimately wind up going there, take the 7-0 lead, and then have 38 points scored against them after that. But they said, oh, Philly fans were horrible. I mean, all the Vikings fans came in here. They thought that they could just go ahead and do whatever they want to the Rocky, to Rocky, and then the steps and all this other stuff, and think that they could just come in here and put their feet up on the furniture. And then when they got a little pushback, all of a sudden things are, oh, that's the most horrible place in the world, blah, blah, blah. Wasn't. Not everybody had the most horrible time. You had the most horrible time because your team stunk it up that day. You got beat 38-7. And as you being a fan, it was probably a very frustrating day for you that day.
Not really, because that was, yes, I was happy Minnesota got to that point, because you got to remember they had Case Keenum starting that year, a guy who's pretty much been a career backup and ended up having the best year of his life that year. So it was kind of, at that point, they were playing with house money, and I was expecting it to end at some point. I didn't think he was going to be able to keep everything going for as long as he did. But Philadelphia was just a team of destiny that year, because you had Carson Wentz, who was playing at an MVP level until he got hurt, and then Nick Foles comes in, and they literally did not miss a beat that year. So I didn't expect Philadelphia to win like 38-7 or whatever the score was. I thought Philadelphia was going to win pretty handedly, just because Philadelphia never really went through a slump that year. Even when Wentz went down, they never really had kind of that 2 or 3 game stretch where you could point and look at like, okay, this is something that Philly needs to improve on, versus even when Minnesota was winning, there was always something that you could look at in the games they were winning saying, maybe they shouldn't have won this game. They need to fix this if they want to go somewhere. And Minnesota somehow got to the point they got to. But just with Case Keenum, I never felt confident enough that they could get to the Super Bowl no matter who they played.
Right. And that's kind of that's a real statement, obviously, because I thought that, like I said, I thought the Saints were the better team and really should have won that game, that divisional playoff game.
Mhm.
It didn't happen, and Diggs scores that touchdown, and really that was the last touchdown you saw him score in that stadium, right?
No, he played
He
one more
went to
year.
Buffalo.
He played
Did he
one
play
more
one
year.
more
He played in 2018, and then after the 2018 season's when he left.
So, and I remember going there the next year. I didn't go to the Super Bowl, but the following year we played you guys, and it was like a 1 o'clock game. And I went up there to try to share with the Minnesota fan base that we're not all bad. I actually did. They put me on the news and everything because we had a good time, and it was just like I'm a fun guy. It's not like it's I beat up a little bit, but it's not bad. Like that's. I want to be able to have communication. I want you to be able to beat me up a little bit too. That's part of the business here. But I'll never forget. I put myself in the front row, in the corner, and I literally had like 6 sections behind me, singing to me, "Nah, nah, 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 hey, 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 goodbye." After that game, because we got slaughtered by the Vikings that day, and because it was a 1 o'clock game. Kirk Cousins plays well at 1 o'clock games when it's
Yes,
not
he does.
prime time. When it's not prime time, then because when the lights turn on, that's when he has a really bad day. But they crushed us that game, and everybody's like singing to me, which is kind of funny because I mean I'm doing my thing all game long. I'm yelling and carrying on the entire time, and it's a lot of energy in a loss,
Right.
So. So then everybody comes up and takes pictures, and they realize. And then when I remember walking back into the hotel bar afterwards, and everybody from the bar actually gave me a round of applause, which was funny to me because I was like, because they knew what I was dealing with. I guess they showed it a lot more on the local broadcast.
Probably.
That I was getting beat up, not physically, but just
Yeah.
getting beat up. And to be able to take it like that with still a smile on my face was a lot of fun. So, of course, it's hard to take the smile off your face when you've won a Super Bowl.
Right, exactly.
And most recently, the last Super Bowl, and it was in that stadium. So,
Yep.
but that being said, we did mention a little bit about your quarterback there, Kirk Cousins. And obviously, he's a free agent right now. Let's start off with this. Do you believe that they will re-sign him?
I believe that they're going to try to. But if he honestly expects that he's going to get $51 million a year, there ain't no way in hell Minnesota's going to bring him back. Not for $51 million a year. I'm okay with doing it 2 years at 30 or 2 years at 70 million. So basically 35 million per year, because that still keeps him in the top 10 range for quarterback pay, but not in the top 5 anymore. And when you look at take the wins and losses out of the equation, when you look at the actual numbers itself, he is a top 10 quarterback when you look at the numbers itself. Completion percentage, touchdowns, yards, everything like that. He's a top 10 quarterback. He just hasn't found a way to win consistently. But I do expect Minnesota to target a quarterback in the draft. I just don't think they're in a position where they can draft one right now and throw that quarterback in week 1 this year and start him. They need to have that veteran to at least bridge that quarterback for 1 or 2 years. And I think Cousins is the guy that can do that because unlike a lot of veterans, when they get to this point in their career, Kirk Cousins is one of those guys that would help a younger player. He would understand he's getting to the point in his career where he doesn't have many years left. He would understand that I have 2 years left in Minnesota, and that's probably it. So why not at least help them for the future since they've taken care of me now for the last 9 years with the contracts they've given me?
Now, it's funny because I always look at when I think of Kirk Cousins, besides the fact that I think that he is terrible when the lights are on, I look at him very similar to the way I look at Doug Peterson.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that he is going to be a very good offensive coordinator and
Oh, he will
possibly
be.
a coach.
He will if he wants to.
Yeah, and I think that's I don't know his personality well enough to be able to say, and what makes me think that his personality is not shining enough for television
Mm-hmm.
is the fact that he doesn't do well in the limelight
Yeah.
when the spotlight is on him. And at some point you got to think, like, is it really in his head? Is it all just a head game for him about that because of the fact that, hey, I lost, I've been losing games, and now I can't help but lose.
Well,
It's so
I think it kind of in his head, but when you look at the Vikings game against Philadelphia on Monday night this year, he wasn't the reason why Minnesota lost. It was the 4 fumbles that the freaking Vikings had, with 3 of them coming in the first half, which is why they lost. And if you look at how Cousins played in that game, he single-handedly kept Minnesota in the game against Philadelphia in week 2. So it's not like he has, like, yes, his primetime record is terrible, but when you actually, like, watch a game, like, start to finish and kind of look at how he plays, a lot of the losses in primetime are not on him. It's a lot of things that, like, the defense gives up 40 points, or in the Philadelphia game this year, the running back fumbles 3 times, and then Justin Jefferson fumbles inside the 2-yard line, and the ball goes out of the end zone for a touchback. That's stuff that you can't put on Kirk Cousins, because in that Philadelphia game, what was he, like 32 of 43 for 378, 3 touchdowns? So it's not like he played terrible. He played well enough to win that game. It was just everything else that goes with it didn't go Minnesota's way, and they left with another loss. So that's why when people say, like, he's terrible on primetime, I'm like, yeah, when you look at the record, he's terrible on primetime. But how many times has it actually been
a
his
lot
fault?
of games that let's face it,
Oh,
there
I know,
has
I
been
know.
a lot
Yeah,
of games that
yeah.
he's not
Oh, yeah.
played up to his capacity.
Yeah.
So yeah, I could agree with you that one game he played better, but the team lost around him.
Yeah.
Because I remember when that running back fumbled for the second time,
Madison.
it made me think, hey, do you wish you kept your other running back?
I don't know. I wish they would have started Tyson Chandler sooner, because you saw how Tyson Chandler played the final 5 weeks of the year after Madison got hurt. I'm like, why didn't you start that guy sooner? Because the guy at least has speed. Alexander Madison is completely useless if he can't find the hole because he's slow. Tyson Chandler's got a 4.3 40 speed and doesn't really need that much of a hole. You give him a little bit of a hole, he's getting 8, 9, 10 yards at a crack, versus Madison was averaging 2.9 yards a carry this year.
Yeah, but when you have a guy who's, I mean, what did he have? Like 4,500 yards in 3 years? And then you got rid of him. You just got rid of him. Says, you know what? We're not going to pay you. And then of course he went to
The Jets did nothing.
The Jets and did nothing. But the Jet, and I don't know why, like, the Jets didn't use him there either. Other than the fact that I felt like he didn't care. I felt like the moment that he got dropped by Minnesota, he felt slighted, and he just wasn't going to play that season. And then of course he gets picked up by the Ravens and does nothing for them either.
The thing with Delvin Cook when he went to the Jets was Breece Hall and him are basically the same type of running back. But Breece Hall is about 5 years younger, and obviously the Jets' offense was kind of built around Breece Hall before Aaron Rodgers got there. So I think Delvin Cook knew going there he wasn't going to be the number one option. I think he expected to play more. But when you look at all the teams that Delvin Cook said he was looking at, the Miami Dolphins, there's no way he would have started over Devin Etienne or Raheem Mostert. He would have been third down on the depth chart there and would have even seen less time. And Minnesota tried to keep him. They said they were going to restructure his contract. He was set to make, I believe, $12.8 million last year. Minnesota wanted to bring his contract down to 10. So it wasn't like he was taking a major pay cut. He said no, and he ended up signing for $3 million with the Jets. So he lost a lot more money than he would have if he would have stayed in Minnesota, and he still would have been the number one back had he stayed.
Yeah, I mean, because like I said, up until the point that, I mean, your running back really wasn't doing much at all except fumbling the ball, especially in the beginning of the season. So, and just costing games. But so when I say that Kirk Cousins is a coach killer, do you agree with that?
Not necessarily. I think Mike Zimmer killed himself, because if you find out the stories of the last 2 years of his tenure in Minnesota and what he did in that locker room to the coaches and the players, I'm honestly surprised Zimmer lasted as long as he did, because there are so many stories coming out now with how Zimmer treated his coaches, how Zimmer treated a lot of his players. And the stories coming out are from guys like Harrison Smith and Eric Kendrick, players who are some of the most well-respected players in the NFL who never run their mouth, who never get in trouble, and now they're actually kind of opening their mouth and throwing Zimmer under the bus for kind of the culture change that he had. It's not a good look for Minnesota for not noticing this sooner. It's not a good look for Zimmer as opposed to him ever trying to get another head coaching job again, because if you're hearing what's been going on those final couple of years in Minnesota, I don't think there's ever going to be another team that gives him a shot. And Minnesota brought Kevin O'Connell in because of his relationship with Kirk Cousins, because he's had the experience with Kirk Cousins in Washington, and you saw how he played. He played very well under Kevin O'Connell last year, and after the first couple of games this year, he was playing at an MVP pace this year with Kevin O'Connell's system. So I think in terms of a coach killer, I think you need to get a coach that fits the Kirk Cousins system. If you try to put a new system in that does not fit his strengths, then yes, he would be a coach killer because he's a very limited quarterback in what he can do. He's not a scrambler. He's a pocket passer that needs to get the ball and get it out really quick and get the ball and kind of read the field. If you try to make it more like a spread offense like a lot of these teams are doing now, it's not going to work. You need that system that fits his strength, and that's why they brought in O'Connell. So it just depends, in my opinion. He can be a coach killer based on the system he's in.
So would you then – so you're saying that you would give him $35 million, that's where you think his ceiling really is.
Yeah.
Especially he's, 35, turning 36
Yeah, he'll be
this year.
36. He'll be 36 in October.
Right. So, and – I could almost see that with some escalators. I would use that. Again, bonuses. Let's
this year especially with that torn Achilles, you don't even know if he's going to be playing until November. So if I'm giving him $35 million a year, first year of that contract's going to be incentive based because you need to even see if he can even get back on the field next year and even play close to that level that he was playing at before he got hurt. And if he can show you that he can do that, then I would just basically make the second year of that deal basically the full $35 million and do what you do. But it's that first year that's the big question mark right now because you need to make sure that he's 100% before you bring him back. And then you need to make sure he can still play at the level he was playing at before he got hurt.
Well, but I also look at it as, because I've seen stuff. I guess I saw him on a tennis court.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's where he was able to actually put some weight on that and actually pivot, which is really what you need to do on an Achilles. You need to be able to pivot. You need to be able to trust that it's not going to give way. And that's the biggest deal when it comes to stuff like that. But I'll be interested to see. I feel that if he does come and he accepts a $35 million contract, which I don't believe he will.
I don't either.
I think somebody else is going to give him $40 million.
I think Atlanta's going to go all in for him at this point if they don't get Justin Fields. His wife's from Atlanta. He's been linked to Atlanta since even before the season was over, knowing kind of that Atlanta's really just missing that quarterback. If Atlanta can obviously get the trade done with Chicago, I think Justin Fields goes there, obviously. But if that trade doesn't happen, I think Kirk Cousins to Atlanta is the perfect fit for him, just because he's got a lot of young weapons around him, like Bijan Robinson, Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and just some of the weapons that Atlanta has. And it would just be basically the first time that Atlanta's had a legitimate quarterback since Matt Ryan's MVP season.
Right. Well, but who knows what type of quarterback are you getting? Are you getting what he was beforehand, or are you getting it that he's, I guess he only really needs to be a manager who can throw the ball a little bit. He's still got the arm strength. That's the one thing that the Achilles didn't take away was the arm strength that he's got.
If you put him in that division, he's instantly the best quarterback in that division. He's better than Bryce Young. He's better than Derek Carr, and he's better than whoever Tampa Bay is going to have if they don't bring Baker Mayfield back. He would be the best quarterback in that division, and Atlanta, in my opinion, has the best defense in that division with Tampa. But he would be the best quarterback to get him over the hump.
Maybe. Again, and the one thing that happens in Atlanta is that you don't have a lot of primetime games, so you don't even have that as a thought process. You're going to maybe play one Thursday night game, and that's it. So it would really kind of benefit you to go down there and not, because in Atlanta, let's face it, the Falcons are the third favorite team in that city, behind the soccer team and the Braves, in that order. Soccer rules in Atlanta. And then the Braves are second. The Falcons are like a distant third. That soccer, as I call it, Megatron's butthole, sells out for soccer games, but does not sell out for the Falcons.
Atlanta United.
So, and their soccer team's not even that great.
Not anymore. They were stinking when they first came in the league. Those first 3 years, you couldn't even win at Atlanta when they first came in the league.
Right now, it's a little different, but hey, but they still support that team pretty well. It'll be interesting to see. Obviously, if they don't re-sign him, who do you feel is potential?
I do still think if they do not get Kirk Cousins, they're going to still sign a veteran in free agency, but I also think they're still going to draft. If I had my choice, I would go Baker Mayfield as a free agent just because he plays a very similar style to Kirk Cousins, and he's obviously 6 years younger. He would come a lot cheaper than what Kirk Cousins would be, so I think you could get Baker Mayfield at like 2 years at 50, which is $25 million a year as opposed to 35. I've heard the name Russell Wilson thrown into Minnesota as well, which I'm okay with it on a 1-year deal with a team option for year 2. Because if I'm getting the Russell Wilson before Denver, well, definitely I'm going to keep him around for that second year because he was very good in Seattle. But if I'm going to get the Russell Wilson that we've seen in Denver the last 2 years, I don't want him more than 1 year. I literally want him there just to mentor the young quarterback for 1 year, and then you can go somewhere else for the rest of your career. But I think at this point, I think Minnesota wants to draft Michael Penix. And I know the injury history of Michael Penix is a concern for everybody, which, yes, it's a concern for me too, especially when you have 2 blown out knees and not 1. But when you look at how he played with Washington and just the weapons, not Jalen Milroe, but Rome Odunze, the other wide receiver he has, the tight end, Dylan Johnson, the offense that Washington ran last year is very similar to what the Vikings run. Odunze was their Jefferson. The tight end was Hawkinson. Dylan Johnson was kind of the Tyson Chandler running back. And then Jalen McMillan was Jordan Addison. So Penix would be stepping into a similar offensive scheme that he ran at Washington. And he has that big arm that Kevin O'Connell loves to have.
I think Penix would make sense because of where you guys are drafting. I mean, you guys are what? Somewhere in the
11.
I was going to say 10 to 14 range.
Yeah.
So being 11, I think that you'd be picking Penix a little high.
I think they would take him. I think they would go second round for him, or I think they would pull what Baltimore did a couple of years ago, where they drafted whoever they drafted at 14, and then they traded back in to take Lamar Jackson at 32. I think that's what happens with Minnesota. I think Minnesota picks somebody else at 11, and if Penix is still sitting there at like that 25 to 26 range, then they trade back in and get him that late part of the first round, just so they can have that extra option year on them in case they do end up sitting him for a year or two. Then you could use that option and at least see what he's got for 3 years.
Okay, I hear that. Just to answer your question here, Miss Queen, nobody. That they're not even going to the combine. They said that they're looking at people, I'm sure, but they're not going to spend any time at the combine. I believe that I heard Jerry Jones and the coach say that they were not going to go there. So I don't think that they really care about the combine even a little bit, and they're going to just kind of go off of what happened during the year for the Cowboys themselves. Which when you look at Jerry Jones and how he's doing with things, I think that's par for course. Obviously, he doesn't need to see anything that's going on. He just needs to feel with his instincts that this is going to be the right pick so that team makes it to the Super Bowl this year, just like they did last year and the year before and the year before. Oh, God. I love being able to troll some of the Cowboys, but it's so let's turn it up a little bit. We're going to change it up here a second. Obviously, you are a Cubs fan. Now it's funny to me because you're in Milwaukee or closer to Milwaukee and you're a Cubs fan. How did that arrive?
Milwaukee Braves left Milwaukee for 35 years before the Brewers ended up getting the Brewers. So pretty much that 30-year window when the Braves left to when the Brewers came back, all those fans that decided not to follow them down to Atlanta became Cubs fans because it was the closest team. That was kind of my whole family. They were Milwaukee Braves fans growing up. Once the Braves left, they became Cubs fans and just never converted back.
Gotcha. So do they still kind of root for the Braves some?
A little bit, depending on who it is. A lot of them now are Cubs first and Brewers second, just because the Brewers are the in-state team. But even if you go to Milwaukee, I don't know how often you go to Milwaukee, but I've said this to my family like a lot. There are more Chicago Cubs fans in Milwaukee than there are Brewer fans. And that's because of the Braves leaving. A lot of the Braves fans at that time migrated to be the Cubs, and for the most part, the Cubs have had more success than the Brewers. So they kind of just stayed the Cubs fans. Yes, the Brewer fans came into play, and they'll still root for the Brewers, but
Really, you could say that? Didn't the Brewers win a World Series at one point?
No, the Brewers have never won. They've only been to the one World Series in 1982, I believe it was, when they lost to the Cardinals.
Okay.
They've never been back to the World Series.
And I remember, was it Milwaukee with CC Sabathia? But no, I guess not.
Yeah, it was Milwaukee who had CC Sabathia, and they ended up losing 3-1 to the Phillies in the NLDS in 2008, the first year that the Phillies won the World Series against Tampa.
I remember that, because we torched him. And
Yep.
they were actually favored to win that series.
And then a couple years later, they did the same thing with Zach Greinke, where they traded for Greinke. Greinke took him to the NLCS in 2011 or 2012, and it won 7 games against the Cardinals before the Cardinals knocked them out, and that's the year that the Cardinals beat Texas on the David Freese game.
Right. That was right after the Cardinals beat us 1-0 in Game 5.
Yep.
That was maybe the last time I saw 2 pitchers go complete game.
Yep.
It's as ridiculous as that sounds, because I haven't seen 2 pitchers throw a complete game within the last 5 years. At least not that I saw. You know what I mean? I'm sure it may have happened, but so yeah, I mean, I guess that the Cubs did finally break their 100-year snide by winning one. So everybody was all excited. There was much rejoicing in your household at that point.
Oh, there's much. I went down to Chicago for the victory parade. That was a grand old time.
Especially since it was 100 years in the making.
Right.
And unfortunately they're going to have to wait another 100 years, because I feel like that franchise just doesn't know what to do, like what pieces they really need. Does it seem like that they're always a piece or two short?
It does, but I'm not necessarily don't know what they need. They're just kind of in the mindset that they value their prospects so much that they're afraid to trade their prospects away for pieces. And that was something that Theo Epstein did when he came to Chicago. Like, he did a great job of acquiring these prospects for 4 years. But once he got to the point where he felt they were competitive enough, he called up the ones that he wanted to use, as in Rizzo, Bryant, Baez, and Schwarber. Like, he called those 4 up, and then the rest of them he unloaded for pieces, whether it was Jose Quintana in a trade, whether it was trading for relievers and things like that. Like, he made the trades that he knew he needed to make to sustain the success as much as possible. The new regime at this point, they've done the same thing. They've done such a great job acquiring all these pieces the last 4 or 5 years to have them be the number 2 or number 1 ranked farm system, depending on what publication you look at. But now they're kind of on that verge where they're a piece or 2 away from being a consistent playoff contender again. They made the move to get Bellinger back. They signed Shota Imanaga. But how many players did you hear them be linked to on the trade market this year? You heard them being linked to Shane Bieber. You heard them being linked to Tyler Glasnow. You heard them being linked to all these starting pitchers. But they're afraid to part with these prospects because they don't want to do it. Well, if you want to be a contender again, if you want to have the long-term success that you're aiming for, at some point you need to get rid of these prospects. Otherwise, it's not going to do you any good, because you know as well as I do, these prospects might be dominating in the minor leagues. But if you're counting on 15 prospects to lead you to the future, 5 or 6 of them are going to pan out. The other 9 are not going to pan out, and you're pretty much shot yourself in the foot by not getting rid of some of these pieces.
Right. No, and the Phillies do the same thing. It's changed recently with Dombrowski, where Dombrowski says, hey, listen, if they are, like, there's certain pieces that are almost untouchable, like Andrew Painter right now. He's like a top 25 prospect. Yep. Yeah, I feel like that if you are in the top 25, in the top 50, you should almost be able to trade like a 1-for-1. That's like we're going to give you 120, a top 25 prospect, and then we're going to give you in the top 200. You know what I mean? Like that's somebody in the 160 range. You know what I mean? Somebody we're not going to really care about. If you feel that the guy who's at the number 80 on that list is going to be just as good as the guy who's in the number in 24 on that list, then you've got a problem.
And that's what and that's where the Cubs are right now. They have 7 prospects in the top 100. They have another one that's at like 103. So they almost have 8 of the top 100 prospects. They have 4 inside the top 51. 3 of them are inside the top 30. And that number 51 prospect is Michael Busch, who the Cubs traded for with the Los Angeles Dodgers. He was the number 2 prospect in the Dodgers system when they traded for him. He's number 5 in the Cubs system, and he's sitting at number 51, which goes to show you how many better players they feel are better than him ahead of him. But, like, number 13 is Pete Crow Armstrong. Like, at this point, he's untouchable, and I don't know why, because Cody Bellinger plays the same position as Pete Crow Armstrong. So if your ultimate goal is to keep Bellinger, I think he might be moving to first base. The only prospect to me at the point that the Cubs should not be trading is Cade Horton. He's number 25 or 26, and he's their top pitching prospect. He's the only one, in my opinion, that should be untouchable. Otherwise, I think every other prospect in their system at this point should be up for trades. I mean, what happens if Mike Trout comes available? You mean to tell me that if the Angels called you and said, we want Pete Crow Armstrong and 2 of your top 5 prospects for Mike Trout, you're not going to do it? Because if you don't do it, you're freaking foolish.
Right, but again, I hear that, but I don't know that you're foolish just because it's Mike Trout. And as much as I love Mike Trout, I think that he is only going to be able to give you so much.
Yeah, and I agree, but it's just kind of the sentiment of it. We could have even said like Shohei. Before Shohei signed the free agent deal, if the Angels would have called the Cubs and said, we know that you're interested in signing Shohei in free agency. Well, how about we work out a trade right now? We'll give you Shohei for Pete Crow Armstrong, your top prospect, and 3 or 4 other top 10 prospects. You don't do that deal, you're freaking foolish. Even if you don't retain him in free agency, just to have him on your team for 3 months gives you a great shot of making the playoffs, and the Cubs missed the playoffs by 1 game.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, even if he gets hurt the way he did and still uses his bat and everything,
they probably make the playoffs.
They probably do. You know, so
and that's been the biggest problem with Jed Hoyer is every year at the trade deadline, you hear all these names that want to go to the Cubs. Justin Verlander comes to mind. In 2017, when the Cubs traded for Jose Quintana, Justin Verlander wanted to come to Chicago. There's a story, if you remember it, where Justin Verlander's agent called him and said, you've been traded. Before he found out what team he was going to, he was packing his bags and heading to Chicago because he thought he was going to the Cubs. To find out he's going to Houston because the Cubs wanted Jose Quintana more for whatever reason.
Well, that's because Justin Verlander is not a great playoff pitcher.
No.
Yet, and that's, ultimately you got to think about that as well. However, they did win a World Series. They made it back to the ALCS last year.
Yeah.
Even after having him sign somewhere else and then coming back home. So, that's because the Mets always are good at Mets and stuff.
Mets are great.
So they Mets it up. That's what they do. They Mets it up. I love the Mets.
The Mets play with Monopoly money and then realize the money's not real. And it's like, oh shit, we messed up.
Can't buy championships anymore unless you really know what you're doing. It's just buying players does not make it work anymore. That stopped working with Wayne Huizenga, who actually knew how to build a baseball team. He had the right people around him and was able. The biggest decision he made was Darren Daulton. You know what I mean? Darren Daulton walked in there and he didn't care that everybody was a better player than he was. He goes, "This is my clubhouse now. I own this place. You listen to what I say." Right. And he took him to the World Series and won the World Series. So. And thinking about the guys that were on that field, like Sheffield, you know what I mean? The guys that just played on that team and stuff like that. Daulton was a 200 hitter and the catcher. You know what I mean? So he really wasn't anything. I think he batted 180 in that playoffs.
Yep.
But he was still the captain of that team. And got his ring in that regards. So, how do you think the Cubs do this year? You said they were one game out. They are really in a weak division. That division is not very strong. Do you think that they can get over the hump and either win the division or secure that third wild card spot?
I don't think they win the division. Right now, I think the floor for them is around 77, 78 wins, and the ceiling for them is about 87. So I think they kind of have like a 10-game window just because there's so many question marks with that team yet in terms of what are they going to do in the starting rotation if Jordan Wicks doesn't pan out. They don't have a number 5 starter. Is Shota Imanaga going to be able to adjust quick enough to the MLB side of things as opposed to the Japanese side of things to be a productive left-handed pitcher? And then Kyle Hendricks is in the final year of his contract, so what's going to happen with him after this year? You still have questions in your bullpen. You still have questions at first base, whether Michael Busch is the answer or not. You have to figure out if Christopher Morel is going to be your everyday third baseman or if you're going to leave him at DH, and then you got Nick Madrigal playing at third, which, yeah, we know how that's going to work out. So there's still questions that they need to address. And the way I see the division, I think the Brewers are like an 83, 84 win team. I think the Reds are an 83, 84 win team. I think the Cardinals are a 90 win team, mainly because they added Sonny Gray to that rotation. They added Kyle Gibson to that rotation, and they added another pitcher that I can't remember to that rotation. But you have to look at the year that the Cardinals had last year. Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado had the worst years that they've had in about 9 years. I'm not willing to bet that they have another bad year. I'm willing to bet that one of those two gets back to the way they were playing before last year. And if one of those two gets back to their normal offensive level, that's going to be the biggest difference for St. Louis this year.
Yeah, I as funny as this sounds, like I always looked at St. Louis as, and as much as I hated La Russa, I mean, I felt like that he was a halfway decent manager. And although he felt like he invented baseball, which I can't stand. I can't stand when somebody feels like that they are above the game. And he definitely felt that way.
Oh, yeah.
Let's put the pitcher batting 8th because I want to be smarter than everybody else. Shut the frig up. You know what I mean? It's like I felt like smacking him in the face. He had I hate the face as well. But that being said, he was a good enough manager, and I feel like management loses games for them. They lost games last year.
Yeah, Oliver Marmol's terrible. And to this day, like one of my good buddies, and he's actually the godparent of my daughter, is a Cardinal fan. He grew up in St. Louis and he lives up here now. We're both trying to figure out why Mike Schilt got fired, because the guy got fired after they won 94 games. They won the NL Central and then lost in the division round of the playoffs to the Braves the year that the Braves won the World Series. We're still trying to figure out why that guy got fired, and now he's the manager in San Diego. And that manager was basically the bench coach for Tony La Russa for, I think, 4 years. It was Mike Matheny for a couple of years before Matheny got his job, and then Mike Schilt took over for Matheny, and then he was Matheny's bench coach. And then once Matheny left, Schilt got the job in St. Louis, and all that guy did was win 90, 91, 89, and 94 games in his 4 years as manager, and they fired him. Don't know why, but now you bring in Oliver Marmol, who had a decent first year. It wasn't a great first year. I think he won 89 games his first year, made the playoffs, but then he ends up going 71 and 91 last year for the worst season that St. Louis has had in over 2 decades. So that goes to show you that Oliver Marmol, I don't think, should have been the manager. I think it was more so they kept him around because he's been in the organization for as long as he's been there. But at some point, you need to look at the roster that they had last year and be like, how did we only win 71 games with who we had on this team?
Oh, I agree. I think that they did have some players, but like I said, there were a number of players that just were not playing very well.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And that kind of does it for him. How do you feel? I mean, because you mentioned it very early, and obviously he was an integral part of you guys winning World Series. When you see Schwarber in a Phillies uniform doing as well as he did, and and like as well as he did, I'll be 100% honest. When we signed Schwarber and they were talking about signing him, I was like, I don't like this guy. He's a career 240 hitter who hits at most 25 home runs. Now, since he's been here, he has not been hurt. He hasn't been as bad of a defensive liability as he really could be. And he's only hit 40 plus home runs.
Yeah.
each year.
I mean, the
So-
197 average sucks, but when you take 100 walks and you're hitting 45 home runs, I think you can live with it. But Jed Hoyer said this last year, and I actually give him a ton of respect for saying this because you typically don't hear many GMs say this. He basically said that Kyle Schwarber was the one that got away, and he kind of regrets not giving him the extension when they had the chance. And at the time, I understood why, because you had Kyle Schwarber, who great hitter home run wise. You knew he was going to hit home runs. You knew he was going to get on base if he was your leadoff hitter because of the walks. That's just what he did. But at the time, he was one of the worst left fielders in baseball. He was not able to play catcher anymore because of his knees. So it was getting to the point in Chicago where he did not have a position to play. And they wanted to have his bat in that lineup so bad, but it's like, Wilson Contreras is our catcher. You're not going to be catching. Anthony Rizzo is our first baseman. Obviously, you're not playing at first. We have Jason Hayward in right. You're a liability in left. We don't have a spot to play you, so we can't re-sign you. Had Jed Hoyer known that the DH was going to be coming to both the National League and the American League, I think Schwarber's in Chicago because I think Jed Hoyer just locks him up on a 6-year deal and says, here, you're our DH. Just swing for the fences.
Yeah, you'll get to play, a third of the games or, even a quarter of the games out in left field. And I mean, he was able to, like I said, he hasn't been so bad of a defensive liability. Yeah. He still breaks on the ball weird. You know what I mean? He doesn't know how to do some of the things he's supposed to do.
Right.
But it doesn't matter because he hits 45 home runs.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And he's a clubhouse leader.
He is. He's a playoff monster.
Yeah. I mean, so and even when we got no hit by Houston in the World Series, that combined no hitter, he was the one they spoke to. He's like, yeah, well, I don't care. He's like, yeah, it doesn't matter. We'll be back tomorrow, and we're gonna battle and stuff like that. And of course, we lost that series, but that said a lot. It's just like, yeah, we just got no hit. Who cares?
Right.
It's like no big deal. You know what I mean? Who really does care? Because actually, they did it to him before. It wound up going to the 9th inning. When the day that they clinched, the very next day, Houston almost no hit them.
Yep.
Okay, 2 outs in the 9th inning, they finally got their first hit. So,
yep.
But yeah, when I think of Schwarber and I think of where he was beforehand, because he had only really hit 26 home runs. That was the most he had hit in a year.
Yep.
And then he came here and he hit, was on that tear. He had, the month of June, everybody was saying it was, there was Hoagie Fest. During Hoagie Fest, he wound up hitting all them home runs. Wound up having like close to 50 home runs, or did he even hit 50? No, I think he just
48. I think he hit 48.
Yeah, but I mean, even still, like that was an amazing season that year.
Yeah.
He was trying to keep pace with Ohtani, who I think I had 54 that year, 55 that year. But it was, and again, that was when we made it into the playoffs in the last second. But that's when we realized that we were a playoff bound team. Like we were built for the playoffs. We weren't really built for the regular season in the long haul. So,
and that's the thing with what you said about Schwarber too, never having 26 home runs before he got to Philly. And that goes back to just his defensive liability in left. There was times where the Cubs just couldn't afford to put him in left field because they were in the middle of a playoff race, and he may have started the game, but by the 5th inning they had to take him out because they had like a 3-1 lead, and like, we need a defender out here in case there is a fly ball in your direction. Like, we need to seal this win. And at the time he was hitting a 130 against lefties. So you already knew there's 50 games a year that he wasn't going to start because he could not hit a lefty to save his life. And then he finally, he still doesn't hit lefties well. I think he's only hitting like a 168 or a 169 off of lefties, which isn't great, but it's still like a 30, 40 point increase. But at least with the DH, you can still use him against lefties, even if it's only for 2 at-bats. It's getting him an extra 30 games a year that he didn't have in Chicago. And if you're hitting 1 home run every 3 games on average, which I think he's at 1 home run every 4 games basically at this point. So, you add that to what he was doing, that's still a 35 homer guy in Chicago if he was on kind of that same schedule that he is now.
Yeah. So, again, that's why I had to ask it when I mentioned the name Schwarber, how you feel about that. It's he did get away. And, of course, he went into Boston and he helped them in a playoff run. And like I said, I thought that he was getting paid Like I thought that the Phillies paid him here on what they thought, and I just didn't think he was going to pan out so good, and he wound up panning out better than expected.
Yeah,
He still has it.
I think he's our modern day version of David Ortiz. Because David Ortiz could not play first base. He was a defensive liability, but his bat was too good that you had to find a spot in the lineup for him, so they made him a DH in Boston.
Right.
And that's kind of what the Phillies have done with Schwarber. Like, yes, he plays left field like probably 40, 50 games a year just because he can. But if it came down to it, they would be like, you need to stay at DH because you are a defensive liability at certain points of the ball game, but your bat is too valuable not to play.
Right. That's exactly correct. So, hey, listen, we are at the top of the hour. We're going to do a station identification, a quick one today because we're only going to go till 1:30. So we'll be back here in just a couple of minutes right after the station identification. So stay tuned.
I mean, you can see right now, without LeBron, Lakers are struggling.
Let me tell you about a team I hate, all right? I know the Dallas Cowboy fan is here, so I had to make sure he knew how much I hate this team.
I'm ready.
I've often said that the people who run baseball, they try very hard to ruin it.
I'm from Brooklyn. I don't have a problem saying it to his face.
Oh, from Brooklyn.
Hey,
Hey,
guess any.
Sometimes, all you need to change your life is a sign. A sign that says, Hank, this is the place you've been looking for. And sometimes that sign is an actual sign that's mounted to a building. 1 second, I'm looking at a sign. I know what you're thinking, and no, I don't love B-dubs just because I'm a buffalo with wings. Frankly, that's offensive and reductionist. Cause this place, come on. It's like they took beer and made it into a place and then gave that place sports and chicken wings. And the people? Cuba. The best.
Oh! What the is going on, Marty? This isn't a game. This is trivia.
Yeah, this place is kinda like heaven. You know, without needing to get hit by a bus. Let's go, sports bar!
This is a presentation of Northeast Streaming Sports.
And we are back for our second hour, although it's going to be an abbreviated hour this time around. We're going to go to about 1:30 Eastern Standard Time. And I'm going to switch it up here a little bit because I got a hockey guy here. So I got Stat Guy knows some hockey here, and I found out that he is a fan of the Detroit Red Wings. And I actually have a little bit of a disdain for the Red Wings, mostly because of 97 when I watched that team sweep us out of the Stanley Cup and was living in Warren, Michigan, which is a suburb of Detroit, up in 17 Mile and Van Dyke Boulevard for those Detroit people that are out there. But ultimately, a hockey guy it is. And obviously, Detroit has stunk up until the point where they got a new GM a couple years ago, and that GM actually helped build. What was he in Florida, or he wasn't with Tampa, right?
Tampa
he
Bay.
was with Tampa,
Yep.
So he did win a ring with Tampa.
2 of them
down there. Yeah, and ultimately it was his team that kind of got everything going. Of course, knowing the rules and stuff like that, I know what really happened down there. And Tampa was like, no, we want this rule to change because I think people could cheat. And the NHL was like, no, we're not going to change that rule. And they're like, okay, then we're going to use it and cheat. But he was able to do that and win a couple of cups. And now he's brought it back to Detroit. Obviously, Hockey Town missed him, but I will say that guy just knows how to win.
He does.
Since he's gotten there, obviously he got a team that really was the bottom of the barrel. They really were dreck, and now has come back and has really made it a much better situation all the way around. What do you see that he's done that helped spawn this change?
Well, he kind of did exactly what he did in Tampa Bay, where he knew the team was going to be bad for 2 or 3 years, and he accepted that. So he basically said, we're just going to get rid of all the high contracts that we have, and we're going to roll with what we can do for the next couple of years, acquire draft picks, and go from there. Then he decides to bring in Derek Lalonde as his head coach, who was an assistant in Tampa Bay under John Cooper. So Lalonde obviously was part of that Tampa Bay system. He knew what Tampa Bay did to get to the level they're at, to get to the Stanley Cup and all that. And just having that familiarity with Yzerman, it kind of was a perfect pairing, because it's like, this is what we did in Tampa to be successful. This is what I want you to do in Detroit to be successful, which is kind of a no-brainer hire for me at that point. Yzerman, obviously playing in Detroit for 17 years and having 3 Stanley Cup rings in Detroit, knows what hockey means in Detroit. He knows what it takes for hockey to be successful in Detroit. And I think that's ultimately why he wanted to come to Detroit over any job that he could have had, because he wanted to bring a cup back to Detroit, knowing how long it's been since they've had one. But the biggest reasons that Detroit is finally getting to the point where they're probably going to make the playoffs this year was getting Alex DeBrincat in the offseason, adding that scoring punch to Dylan Larkin that they have never had, because it's basically been Dylan Larkin giving you 30, 35 goals, and then your next best scorer was around 14. So you had your one premier scorer in Larkin and then just a bunch of other guys. Now you have Larkin and DeBrincat, who both have over 22 goals. Detroit has 11 or 12 players on the team this year that have double-digit goals already, so they have balanced scoring from top to bottom. But the move that nobody's talking about is when the Red Wings got Patrick Kane. And I know everyone thought that Patrick Kane was dead in the water because of that hip resurfacing surgery that he had last year, and he's played 25 games this year because obviously he missed time to recover from that hip surgery. He's got 28 points in 25 games. He's averaging more than a point per game. He's on pace for 51 points, I believe, because the most games he can play is 46. He's got 13 goals, and he's finally playing, not at the Stanley Cup level, but he's got that connection with Alex DeBrincat that he had back in Chicago. And since those two have gotten together, this Detroit offense is starting to kind of be a lethal offense. They put up 6 goals against St. Louis on Sunday and won 6-1. It was 5-0 in the first period before St. Louis could even blink. Then they played Washington on Tuesday and lit Washington up 8-3. So right now, this offense is playing at a level that nobody has seen in Detroit since their Stanley Cup days. They're getting decent enough goaltending to win. Ville Husso's been injured. James Reimer had a good start against St. Louis, but he's played like crap for the most part. And Alex Lyon has been one of the biggest surprises in the NHL. He was the reason why Florida made the playoffs last year when he came in for the injured Sergei Bobrovsky and got them into the playoffs and then kind of kept them afloat in the playoffs. Signed a 1-year, $1 million deal this year to be the third-string goalie. And since he's taken over as a starting goalie, he's got the second-best record in the NHL since January 1st and his third in save percentage at 92.4. So Alex Lyon has proven that he is a starting caliber goalie in this league. But being that he's on a 1-year deal, it's going to be tough for Detroit to retain him because somebody's going to sign him to a multi-year deal to give him a chance.
Why not Detroit?
Because I want Detroit to trade for a goalie that's a little bit younger, and I think he's a better fit.
Gotcha. And who is that goalie? Who do you think that you would like to see them grab?
I would like them to get Elvis Merzlikins from Columbus.
Really?
Yes.
I mean, I feel like that he stinks.
He's having a bad year this year, but the other one that I want him to get is that Connor Ingram from Arizona. Connor Ingram from Arizona has actually been one of the bigger surprises in the NHL. He's got a 2.61 goals against average. He's 5th in the NHL in save percentage at 91 points or 916, but he doesn't get the recognition that a lot of these other goalies get because he plays in Arizona. And Arizona is obviously one of the worst teams offensively. They're one of the worst teams defensively. But yet when you're only allowing 2.5 goals and stopping nearly 92% of your shots, you're doing what you need to do to win games. You put him in Detroit where they actually have an offense, Connor Ingram's going to have a lot of wins in that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I could see that. I like the Phoenix goalie or Arizona goalie better because they just don't play defense. I mean, let's face it. Arizona is not a real franchise. Arizona takes on all the bad contracts because they need to be able to pay somebody enough because there's minimums in in this. So if there wasn't minimums, they wouldn't have. I think that they took over I mean, they wound up taking on the Pronger contract from the
Yep.
Flyers. You know what I mean? So they have, and there's like 3 or 4 of those contracts that they have specifically to just eat the money. They're just taking on the payment because they have to hit the minimum because they don't care about hockey down there. And that's why they don't even play at the stadium anymore. They have to play at college, one of the colleges out there. So, I mean, it'll be nice. I look at them like the A's. You know, Arizona hockey franchise is like the A's in baseball. That the owner doesn't really care very much, and I feel like that the NHL is kind of still keeping them afloat just because they need them. So it'll be nice if they could move them over, even to Salt Lake. Salt Lake City would be nice to have, just a better franchise there because at least hockey's supposed to be there and not in Arizona.
Right. I mean, the arena they play in right now is 4,500 people. I mean, you're trying to support an NHL franchise. There is no way for the long-term longevity of a franchise that you can support a franchise with only 4,500 people in your arena.
Well, no, you can support a franchise because what we learned with COVID is that they don't need fans in the stands.
Yeah.
That's the thing. So whatever they're making at 4,500 people going to those games is still gravy in comparison. They get to, buy a new pair of socks, I guess, for these players or what have you. Right. But that's also the reason why they have the lowest payroll, that they always just make it over the minimum for the cap. So, I mean, I agree. I think that they should definitely go somewhere else. The NHL just doesn't know where to put them just yet.
I think they should go to Quebec City. Bring back the Quebec Nordics and just be done with it, because Quebec has a massive hockey following. Obviously, Montreal's in Quebec, but when you look at the Canadian Hockey League that's up there, I think they have like 6 or 7 teams that are in Quebec, and those are the ones that draw the highest attendance. Like, Quebec loves their hockey. And you put the Quebec City Nordics back in the equation, that's going to be huge for NHL in terms of viewership, marketing, everything, because obviously Toronto was an original 6 and some of that, but the Quebec City Nordics before they went to Colorado was like the consistent, successful franchise outside of Toronto and Canada.
Right. And it really, what kind of killed them was Eric Lindros.
Yep.
When Eric Lindros would not go to them, that's how that franchise finally was like, all right, we got to get out of here. There's no, when we can't have players because of our political views, and that's really what it came down to, was the politics involved, then that's when they had to leave. But, I hear that. I wouldn't mind, but that, again, that moves them from west to east. So I don't know that would actually occur.
Yeah.
I mean, they could move different teams. I mean, there's no reason why Seattle or St. Louis shouldn't be in the East either, but.
Yeah, I mean, Detroit is in the East, but Chicago's in the West. There's no reason why Chicago should be in the West because they're stinking right there. But with Atlanta talking about getting a team back in Atlanta, I don't know how that's going to work unless they plan to relocate somebody to Atlanta. So I guess they're very close to getting a stadium deal reached in Atlanta for a new stadium. And if that's the case, then they said that's the next step for Atlanta, getting a team back.
How is it? I mean, they've tried that 3 different times in Atlanta since I've been alive. I mean, it was the Atlanta Flames, and then they moved them to Calgary. So I guess there is some precedent to go from east to west. Yeah, because like I said, the Calgary Flames, it used to be the Atlanta Flames.
And then the Winnipeg Jets went for the Atlanta Thrashers, came back, then they went to the Winnipeg Jets. And now you see the success that the Winnipeg Jets are having. I think Atlanta finally saw like what it takes to keep a franchise successful. So now it's like, we failed twice on the blueprint, and we tried. We need to go with this blueprint to keep it if we're going to get a team back.
Yeah, I see. I go by the football thing there. When the NFL is the 3rd best franchise, like Atlanta is not a sports city.
It's not.
Yeah, it's just not, and that's part of the problem. I think you're going to go there. I think you're going there to fail.
Yeah,
it's like, how do I put this? When there's a spot that's a restaurant and it changes hands and it changes hands and it changes hands and it changes hands and everybody tries to do their restaurant there and all of it fails. Maybe it's the place. Same situation here. I feel like you can't keep doing the same thing and expecting a different results. So I feel like they'd have a better chance in Charlotte than they would in Atlanta there.
Yeah. But with Carolina being just right there, Carolina pretty much owns. I think Atlanta wants a team back mainly because they've seen the success that Carolina has had the last 5 years. They've seen the success that Florida's had. They've seen the success that Tampa Bay's had. So obviously hockey on that part of the country is having success, but you still need the right ownership. You still need the right coach. You still need the right GM. You still need the right feeder system. And obviously you need to have the fan support. And like you said, football's the third most popular sport in Atlanta. If you get hockey, it probably goes to fourth because the Atlanta Hawks are god awful. And I don't think anybody even cares to go to a Hawks game anymore. So yes, they might be more popular than the Atlanta Hawks, but unless that team is winning right away, like Atlanta United did when they came into the MLS, it's going to take you 4 or 5 years to even get a consistent fan backing support for that team.
Right. Because they're all going to feel like it's eventually you guys are going to leave.
Yeah.
That we are just setting this franchise up to get moved again. So, and that's why I think that I would almost consider putting one in Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think Baltimore would be a better spot. I not a third team in New York. It's like that's a little too much. Or going up Portland, Maine, Rhode Island.
What about Portland, Oregon?
Portland, Oregon, maybe. I kind of see that now that hockey has made it to Seattle, and that they saw what Seattle's doing. I kind of like in Portland. I've not been to Portland, Oregon, so I don't know the city.
Yeah.
But I liken it to Seattle just because I figure it's the same type of person that moves out that way.
Yep.
But I guess they got to have hockey there. If hockey's doing well, you could put it there. I think Salt Lake is really the number one spot that should get a hockey team because you feel like you should just be playing hockey there.
Yep.
I liked Hartford, but Hartford wasn't big enough, really. That was the problem.
The other city I think that is a good fit, they already have the arena, is Kansas City because they have the Sprint Center in Kansas City where they have a lot of hockey events, a lot of Final Fours, a lot of big college basketball events. So they already have the arena in place. They already have the venue in place. Obviously, the Kansas City Chiefs, obviously what they've been doing now. If Kansas City were to get a team, Patrick Mahomes would be involved somehow.
That's exactly it. It's a matter of if he's going to buy the team or not.
He owns 10% of the Royals. He owns 20% of Sporting Kansas City. So he already has his hand in both of those teams. You know damn well that when he retires from the Chiefs, they're probably going to give him some sort of ownership stake in that team. So if Kansas City really wants to get a hockey team, all they have to do is call Patrick Mahomes. And even if it's only a 5% share, any sort of ownership that Mahomes has in that team is going to draw attendance. It's going to draw viewers because he owns part of that team. He's going to be at the games. He's going to do what he needs to do to market that team to get him successful.
Right. So, and I mean, Kansas City used to have a team.
Yep.
And they wound up. I'm trying to think who it was. I think wound up being the Devils. It was Kansas City, and then they went out to they were the Colorado Rockies, and then the New Jersey Devils. No, yeah, because I know Quebec wound up turning into the Avalanche. Mm-hmm. The Nordiques became the Avalanche. But I remember the Colorado Rockies had a team, and they wind up going. I think they wound up moving to New Jersey. That's now we're talking older time.
Yeah, the Kansas City Scouts for 3 years, and then they went from there to Colorado to New Jersey. So yeah, they weren't in Kansas City that long, but at least they kind of still have like the hockey, not necessarily a big following, obviously, but at least they still know what hockey is in Kansas City because they did have a team for a little bit.
And from what I understand, that the I guess it's an AHL or maybe ECHL. I know it can't be East Coast. It would be probably an AHL team or a WHA team. I don't even know if that league still exists. They have hockey there.
Yeah, the Kansas City Mavericks.
So it's not like that and from what I understand, it does do pretty well.
Yep.
So it wouldn't surprise me to be in Kansas City
And they are the Mavericks are the affiliate for the Seattle Kraken. So Seattle's the newest team in the league. So at least obviously if you're going to have the new viewers from Seattle, they're following a team in the Kansas City Mavericks, which they're the ECHL of Seattle. So they're not the
ECHL.
Yeah.
Funny, it's the East Coast Hockey League in Kansas City, but that makes sense to me.
Right, that's just like saying the Houston Astros and Texas Rangers are out west in the American League for baseball when they're smack dab in the center of the damn country. But hey,
Well, yeah, but there's no other teams out there that they can even choose from for the
I know,
AL.
but I'm just saying that's just the geographic, the way sports are nowadays. You have teams all over the place.
Well, that's why they're going to do this whole realignment thing and screw it all up,
Right.
and all those different things.
Like the Minnesota Timberwolves in the northwest of the NBA. But yeah, we're right in the middle of the country by Canada, but you can stick us in the northwest.
And are you a Timberwolves fan?
No, I'm a Bulls fan, but I just think it's funny how like Minnesota's like 3 hours from Chicago, but yet Chicago's in the Central Division and Minnesota's up in the Northwest because that just seemed like a great spot to put them.
Yeah, where else are you going to put them? It's like it was kind of like Vancouver being in the East. I mean, think about Dallas in football. Dallas is in the NFC East because they knew they weren't going to move. That rivalries were too strong there. So that's why they kept them there. So I mean, they could really do whatever they want. Who cares? You know what I mean? It's like you're in the West, you're in the Central. Doesn't really matter. You're going to travel for these games anyways. It's not like you're traveling by bus anymore. You're taking a plane to get wherever you're going. You wind up putting right into the room and such like that. So obviously the trade deadline for hockey is coming up here. And you mentioned that you want a goalie. What else do you think you need besides goaltending that could possibly change? I mean, they're 4 points out of that second wild card spot, correct?
No, Detroit owns the top wild card right now. They are 6th in the East. They have a 9-point lead over missing the playoffs right now. So they got a big lead from basically that top wild card spot to being out of the playoffs, but they're only 4 points out of the number 4 spot, which would put them 2nd in their division. So they're pretty much right in the thick of everything at this point. Obviously, Alex Lyon's going to be their goaltender. They're going to lean on the rest of the way, and James Reimer's played better, but he has not played well this year, and he's also 36 years old, so that's kind of why I want a younger goalie behind Alex Lyon, because Ville Husso has been garbage this year, and I don't trust him anymore this year. But if Detroit adds anything else, they just need more defensive help. Their defense has not been great this year, and right now they can get away with it, because when you're scoring 5, 6, 7, 8 goals a game, you really don't need a great defense, but at some point you're not going to be scoring 8 goals a game. You're going to be scoring 2 goals, 3 goals, even less than 3 goals, and you need your defense to at least be able to keep you in games. And I believe Detroit's offense is 3rd in the NHL. They're averaging, I believe, 3.8 or 3.9 goals per game, so they have a very high-powered offense, but their defense is ranked 26th. Their defense is allowing 3.4 goals per game. So they need more defensive help. Like Moritz Seider, yes, he's very good, but he's kind of had a down year in terms of points. He hasn't done much offensively. Jacob Wallman's had a great year offensively, but he's been one of the worst when it comes to 5-on-5 defending on the defensive end, which isn't that great. Shea Gostisbehere got his first goal in 25 games the other night. He had 2 goals. So, I mean, you have defenders that are good, but none of them are playing good together. They'll have like a stretch where they're playing good, but then they also have a stretch where they're playing terrible. I think Detroit needs to add one more defender to kind of balance that out, where if 2 of your defenders are playing poorly, you have another defender that you can throw in there that's playing well. I don't really know anybody at this point that, in terms of defenders that are who. I mean, Philadelphia's got some nice defenders that I would pick from, but they're still in the playoff hunt, so I don't see them trading, let alone trading with.
Actually, I heard that that 2 defenders specifically were on the market. But they're so even though the one guy who's he's got an expiring contract and Sealer, so it's but I think the one guy is having like a career year, and they were considering still possibly trading him. That the Flyers could be not necessarily sellers, but take advantage of certain situations.
Yeah,
and that's what they're looking to do. If they could get, I mean, from what I understand, they were looking for a number 1 pick for. I want to say I even know who it is. It's Sealer and who's the second peer. He's the second. All right, I'm killing myself here because I should know this right off the top of my head, and I don't. Yeah, because Drysdale's hurt, but he's going to be our top tier guy, and
Sean Walker. Sean Walker, or is that the one that's having the career year?
Sealer was one, and I thought it was.
Because they have
Yeah, I guess it had to be Walker. I
yeah,
guess it has to be Walker.
They have Sean Walker as the 4th best defender to pick up at the trade deadline right now.
Correct. So, and I know that they are looking for.
Are you talking
Sealer?
Scott Lawton was listed on there from Philadelphia as an option. Sealer.
So Sealer being, they want like a number 2 pick for him, and for
Mhm.
Walker they want a number 1 pick.
Yeah.
So if you are a team that's going after a Stanley Cup, and you're willing to give up that number 1 round, the first round pick or a second round pick for either one of those guys, it's not a bad thing because it's a late round pick.
Yep.
But we look at when we think of hockey drafts, we think of it more like baseball, and we need to think of it more like football, because a football draft and a hockey draft are very similar. Because once you get out of the first and second round, the product really drops tremendously. There's not, like I said, you're feeding the AHL team or the ECHL team. So,
and if I'm Detroit, if I'm going for a playoff berth this year or basically Stanley Cup next year, I'm going to go all in. If I'm getting a defender, I'm going to go after Noah Hannafin from Calgary. He is the top rated trade target right now in terms of all positions. He's on a 4-year, $95 million deal and still has 2 years of team control after this. So that's your defender that you can have, and you can build around him next year because, like I said, Shane Gostisbehere, who's the Red Wings have right now, is a free agent after this year. Moritz Seider's a free agent after this year. So both those guys have expiring contracts. You're not keeping both. You're probably going to keep Seider because he's only 23 as opposed to Gostisbehere's 31, and that Noah Hannafin is only 26. So if you can go into next season with a 26-year-old and a 23 going on 24-year-old as your defenders, pair it with Dylan Larkin at 25, Alex DeBrincat at 26, and potentially Patrick Kane coming back next year, that's a legitimate frontline core that you can build around for at least 3-4 years.
Yeah, what would you have to give up for that, though?
They'd probably have to give up, obviously, a first-round pick. They'd probably have to give up multiple picks, and then obviously you're going to look at players in their system. Jonathan Bergeron, who's had some success at the NHL levels, one of the leading scorers for Grand Rapids, would probably be out the way. I think Marco Kasper, who was the Red Wings' #1 draft pick last year, is having an amazing year at Grand Rapids this year, so he'd probably be out the door. You're probably looking at role player guys like JT Compher, Andrew Kopp, Robbie Fabry, some of those guys who are playing well for Detroit, but they're kind of on that third line and don't get the skating ice time that the first and second line get, where you send them to Calgary, they might be on that first or second line. Now, it works out for both sides.
Go from like 12 minutes to 18 minutes a game.
Yeah. It works
Stuff
out for
like
both,
that.
Works out for both sides.
Gotcha. Well, I tell you what, I know that we said we're running out of time here right now, but definitely we got to have you come back some more. So let's see you tomorrow. We're going to see you tomorrow. You're going to stop on tomorrow?
I'll probably hop on for a little bit tomorrow if you or Jay send me the link tomorrow.
Yeah, definitely. I'll make sure that you get the link because I like having a couple of guys here. And listen, talking to Jason's great and all, but he likes to talk over me a lot of the time. So we need somebody in the middle to kind of buffer all that. But for everybody who was watching today, thank you very much for hanging with us. We really do appreciate it. And we'll see you tomorrow at noon Eastern time. Everybody have a great Thursday.